one of the reasons people spend a lot of money unnecessarily is that they fall in love with something they don't own. And they've got a perfectly good version of that already, but they fall in love with this other thing. It's like, love the one you're with, right? See if you can fall in love with your boyfriend or girlfriend or husband or wife, right? Instead of falling in love with somebody else who's, out there. So if you fall in love with the things you own, you'll keep them longer and you'll save a lot of money. If you keep falling in love with things you don't own, you'll spend a lot of money and replace things all the time.
In this episode, we'll learn about how our passions connect us and make us who we are. We're going to be learning this from the world's leading expert on the psychology of love, when people love objects, activities, and all sorts of other things. Welcome to the show, Aaron. How are you doing?
Excellent. It's really a pleasure to be here.
It's a blessing to have you on the show, Aaron. Thank you so much for making out the time to be on Mirror Talk for this soulful conversation. And I'm looking forward to learning so much from you. The first thing that we want to learn from you actually is to know what inspired you to study the psychology of love and why people love things.
Oh, it's kind of a funny story. So, excuse me. So I was working on my PhD, and I was a PhD student in marketing. And a professor was talking about how everything is marketing. Even if you're dating, you're marketing yourself to some other person. And so I thought this was really interesting. And I was single at the time. I thought it was a lot more interesting than normal marketing. So, excuse me. So I asked for permission to do a term paper on this, and I got connected to a professor, Mara Edelman, who had a lot of data on dating services. And we ended up writing a bunch of papers on dating services. And this was back in the late 19, when dating services were just getting going. The whole idea, the internet was about to come. It hadn't quite arrived. It would come in like a year or two from there. And what people would do is that they would place ads, like singles ads, which would basically just you post your profile essentially, but you'd post it in a newspaper or a magazine. And then people would read it, and to contact you, they would phone up a telephone number and hear a voice message that you had left. And then if they liked it, they could leave a voice message. And this was becoming a really big business. And it was a very interesting thing to study. I ended up on the Oprah Winfrey show talking about this whole situation. And in order to really understand it, I needed to study the psychology of love. If I'm studying dating, what makes people attracted to each other? Why do some people fall in love and other people don't? So I was studying the psychology of love, and I did this for years. I put several years worth of work into it. At that point, I needed to pivot and study something that was a little bit more connected to mainstream marketing, because I just wasn't going to get a job if I was trying to be a marketing professor. And I was only really knew about singles ads and dating services. It wasn't going to be very helpful. So yeah. I figured I'd done all this work on psychology and really understood the psychology of love. So why don't I apply that in a marketing context when people love objects or brands or products or services or other things that people love? And that really took off. This was in the mid 19 at this point, and I did the first major research. I was lucky. A lot of people had looked at similar kinds of issues for a long time, but they hadn't looked, okay, let's take the psychology of interpersonal love. Let's look at what happens when people date, and let's see if we can use that to understand what happens when people shop, when they're looking at products. Yeah. People hadn't really approached it that way before. So I was the first person to do an extensive study of that kind. And from then, thereon, I wrote a paper with Barbara Carroll, which used the term brand love. And the term had existed before, like I saw it in print, but it wasn't a popular term, and it hadn't been used much. And our paper really popularized the term brand love. And that just means situations where consumers love products or brands or other kinds of stuff. And from then on, I've kept working on it. It's a fascinating area. And it has a lot to do with, just sort of understanding yourself and why you have certain passions and why certain things connect and other things don't.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. I mean, so I just want to know, I would love to really know what you think. I mean, so are you okay? Are you fine?
Yeah, I just had something stuck in my throat. So
Yeah.
I hope you can do a little bit of editing if you want and maybe pull that out,
Yeah.
all the coughing. So I'm sorry about that, but I should be good now.
Oh, awesome. Okay, I'll do that. Or do you want to take 5 minutes or so we could
No, I'm good. Yeah.
you're good. Awesome.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, no problem. All right. So Aaron, I would just love to know, from all your researches and your work that you've done so far, how would you define the psychology of love?
Well, there's a number of different ways people think about love from a psychological standpoint. My take on it is related to a really old, really ancient idea that also has a lot of more modern scientific validation. And that's this idea that when two people fall in love, they sort of merge to become one person or their identities merge. Of course, it's not a complete merger. Obviously, you can't read the other person's mind and you still are separate people and in many ways, but there is also a real sense in which two people really do come to share so much that it's as if they're one person. And it turns out that at a neurological level in your brain, that really is going on. So there are parts of the brain that are used, certain regions, to think about yourself. And when you fall in love with another person, when you see a picture of them, it activates the parts of your brain that are really thinking about you. And this is true also for brands that people love or objects or hobbies. If you love an object and you see that object, it activates the parts of the brain that normally are used to think about yourself. So there
Mhm.
is a deep kind of connection there. And I think that the reason that happens has to do with why love evolved in animals and then later in humans, the sort of fundamental purpose of what love is for. I think it's a mechanism for helping love sort of do what it needs to do from an evolutionary perspective.
Okay, okay. Wow. So that means people get to love things. It's just something that comes naturally to us, basically, from evolution. I say.
Yeah, and it was fascinating to me to learn how many animals have love. I sort of thought it was like just a human thing for some reason, although I have pets, I have dogs, and I certainly thought they loved me, so I don't know how that was supposed to work. But there was this idea from scientists for a long time that only humans really experience love. Now we know that's not true. You
Mm.
can do brain scans. You can scan a person's brain, and when they're thinking about another person that they love, you can see the pattern of brain activity that happens.
Yeah,
And then you can do the same thing with other animals and show them their mate or their child, and you see the same pattern of brain activity in the other animal. So at that point, it's pretty clear. I mean, it's there's obviously differences. There's always going to be some differences, but for the most part,
yeah.
it's a very similar kind of thing. And here's, at least to me, it was kind of a surprising fact. So people, scientists, biologists who study animals, they've identified like over 1 million different species of animals out there. It's really huge. However, there is something that's completely consistent across all of these very, very many different species. And that is many species of animals, the parents don't raise the children. So if you think about a fish, right, they lay the eggs, they fertilize the eggs, they swim off, and the fish hatch on their own and fend for themselves from the minute they're born. That's a very common way that animal species reproduce. In those species, there is never any kind of emotional bonding
Mm.
between the parent animal and the baby animal. It just doesn't exist. And that's across hundreds of thousands of species. However, there are, of course, other species, mammals, and some birds, where the children are born and the parents have to raise the child. They have to feed the child, protect the child. In every single one of those species, there is a bonding, a love between the parent and the child. So you have this 100% correlation. If the parent is raising and taking care of the kid, there's love. And if the parent is not raising and taking care of the kid, there isn't love.
Yeah.
And it's obvious from this what love evolved to do, which is it's the motivation that gets parents to make sacrifices for their kids. Because of course, if you're a parent animal and you go out and get some food, you could eat that food yourself, right? But
Yeah.
instead, you're giving it to your kids.
Mm.
Well, there has to be some psychological mechanism that motivates that animal to get it to do that
Yeah.
behavior. And that's the same in when we love people. You know, as humans, we take care of them and we give things to them and we look out for them. And love provides that motivation for us. And similarly, when we love objects, we take care of the objects. People who love their cars keep their cars for a longer time. They take better care of them. They repair them more. They clean them more because that's kind of what love motivates us to do.
Yeah, yeah. And is there like a mystery or science behind, the love that we have for things, the love that we have for our cars, for our materialistic things?
Yeah. There's a lot of mystery actually to it. Just to start with, if we go back to this evolution of love in animals and we say, all right, so, love evolves because it provides us motivation to help and take care of somebody else. Well, you want to be, it's very advantageous if an animal, from an evolutionary perspective, takes care of its offspring. That's very good. But if this animal goes around just giving its food to everybody, that's not going to be good. It's not going to have enough food.
Mm.
So, and if this animal goes and like takes its food and tries to give it to a rock, that's really not going to be good. There's no benefit to that whatsoever. So there has to be mechanisms in the animal's brain that steers it in the right direction. It says like, okay, you're going to love your kids and you're going to take care of them, but the rocks and the trees and the other things around you, you're not going to take care of them. You're not going to love them the same way. And there are these mechanisms that in our brain that, of course, we don't love everybody, that sort of point us in the right direction to who and what we love. And one of these, part of what it does is it generally tells people if it's a human being, it's eligible for love. You won't necessarily love it. We don't love every person, but at least it's eligible. It's possible that this is something that you might love. Whereas if it's not a human being, you're going to objectify, you're going to think about it just as an object, not as something that you love. And so that's the normal state of affairs. You'll even meet people who will say, oh, I hear this all the time from people that say you study people who love objects, but nobody, you can't love an object. You can only love another person. That's crazy.
Yeah.
And what's funny is that they're half right. At a psychological level, your brain won't let you love something if it thinks it's an object. But what's amazing is that you do love things, and you love them because unconsciously your brain is thinking about that object as if it was a person. So every time that you love something, your brain is treating it as if it was a person. And you can see this in reverse, right? So your brain usually has a good mechanism that says like, okay, people you might love, objects you don't. There are some people where that mechanism in their brain is really broken and they see a whole lot of objects and treat them psychologically, think about them as if they were human. And what we call those people is hoarders. So I don't know if you've seen stuff about hoarders whose like house gets filled with newspaper, right? Because they can't throw these things away. Well, the reason they can't throw them away is that psychologically, their brain isn't good at sorting them out and saying, hey, that's just a newspaper. Don't get attached to that. So they get these deep emotional connections to like all of these objects and they can't get rid of them. And it becomes extremely problematic for them. to live
Mm.
in this sort of crowded house.
Mm.
So your brain doesn't want that to happen. So it generally says you don't love objects.
Mm.
A few times it makes an exception because it gets fooled and it thinks this object is a person. And there's a number of reasons why your brain can get fooled in that way. And then you can start falling in love with objects.
Yeah. Wow. So for someone who is in that kind of situation, what can he or she do to let go of that hoarding attitude or habit, I would say?
Yeah. So we all have it. Most of us have it a little bit.
Mm.
Most of us have some things that we don't want to let go. So I'll give an example. A friend of mine many years ago made a teapot for me as a gift, a handmade teapot. And I really love that thing. And it broke. It got a crack in it so that it couldn't hold water. And I couldn't use it as a teapot anymore. So here I am sitting with this teapot that is not functional as a teapot. What am I
Mhm.
going to do? Well, I'm lucky it was very pretty. And so I was able to just turn it into a decorative item. So now it's just on a shelf as a decorative, pretty teapot.
Mm.
But there's a lot of times when that happens and you don't really have anything else to do with it, but you can't bring yourself to get rid of it necessarily,
Yeah.
but you don't have any use for it. So what's happening there is, like in the case with the teapot, in my mind, my brain was connecting the teapot to the person who gave it to me.
Mm.
So I was thinking about the teapot as if it was human, not because I thought the teapot itself was actually human, but it had such a strong connection in my brain to this person that when I thought about the teapot, my brain connected it to the person. And then therefore getting rid of the teapot was like getting rid of this relationship with a person that I didn't want to get rid of. So there's a lot of different techniques. One is to take a picture of the object and to sort of transfer. So like, okay, the affections I feel for the object, I'm going to transfer them onto the picture. And then I could take the picture and I could have it in like a digital photo album somewhere. And now I
Mhm.
can get rid of the actual object because it no longer, I've transferred my feelings and my attachment to this picture. Another thing that people sometimes do is to actually say, okay, if my brain is treating this as a person, I need to treat it as a person. And so they'll say goodbye. They'll have a little conversation with the object. And they'll say, it was great having you as a teapot. You were a wonderful teapot for me. I liked you and you made nice tea for me. But now, it's time for us to say goodbye. And, it's been good to know you. So you have this little conversation with it. And that sort of gets your brain to let go because you're using some of the same scripts that you use when you talk to a person. And that works with your brain in terms of what it's expecting because it's treating this object as if it was a person.
As a person. Yeah. Wow. That's a very smart way to go about it. Whenever someone hoards a lot of objects, we call the person hoarder, basically. And
Mhm.
that kind of, becomes their identity. Oh, that guy or that lady or that being is as a hoarder. What's the relationship between our identity as people in a society and the things that we love?
Oh, well, that's very central because how is it that, to go back again to the sort of evolution of love and love evolving as this motivation that gets parents to take care of their children or bonds the two mates together and they take care of each other. How do you get an animal to take these behaviors? Like they'll feed themselves. How do you get them to feed the kids? They'll protect themselves. How do you get them to protect the kids? Well, psychologically, I believe that what happens is that the animal comes to see the offspring, their kids, and people do this. We come to see the people that we love as part of our own self. So once we make them part of our own identity, then we behave towards them the same way we would towards ourselves. So just as we would feed ourselves, we feed them. Just as we would protect ourselves, we protect them because they're part of who we are.
Mm.
When you do this with an object, what it means is that loving something becomes in your mind a way of defining your own identity. You make it part of who you are. And so the things that we love are things that we want to be part of who we are. We find activities or objects that we admire in some way, and we feel that doing this activity or owning this object would sort of make us more the person we want to be or express the person that we are. And so when we fall in love with it, we take it into our own identity, it becomes part of our sense of identity. So you'll find that people who love, say, a sports team, I know you said you were in Germany. I know football is very, very big in Europe,
Yeah.
big in Germany. People who love a sports team, they see that sports team as part of their own identity. Even, they're always saying like, we won or we lost, even though they didn't do anything. They just sat on the couch and drank beer, right? They didn't do anything, but they
Yeah.
still say
Yeah.
we won, like, because it's part of who they are in that way. And you can also see this when you think about pride or shame. So if you love your car and somebody insults the car, you'll feel personally insulted by the insult they directed at the car, which is in a way kind of weird, because if they directed that insult at something else, like some building across the street, you
Mm.
wouldn't feel personally insulted. Why are you insulted when they say it about your car? Well, it's because the car is part of your identity. So when they insult the car, it's like they're insulting you because it's connected to you in that way. So it has a lot to do with what happens as we fall in love with something, how we make it part of our own identity. And it also has to do with what kinds of things we end up falling in love with. Those are the kinds of things that we want to be part of our identity.
Yes, that's true. That's very true. And it comes to this question then, like, is there a way we could, as human beings, is there a way we could control the things that we fall in love with? Like, for example, if I'm so much in love with maybe fast cars, for example, but then because fast cars are not so good for the environment, is there a way I could, psychologically change that and, stop loving fast cars and maybe love some Teslas that are not fast enough?
Teslas are pretty fast cars.
Yeah, I know.
But I hear what you're saying, though. And
Yeah.
that's a great question. That's a great question. And yeah, there are things you can do to change what you love. There's all sorts of stuff. So one of the things that I recommend to people a lot is to save money. Try and fall in love with the things you already own. One of the reasons people spend a lot of money unnecessarily is that they fall in love with something they don't own. And they've got a perfectly good version of that already, but they fall in love with this other thing. It's like, love the one you're with, right? See if you can fall in love with your boyfriend or girlfriend or husband or wife, right? Instead of falling in love with somebody else who's, out there.
Mhm.
So if you fall in love with the things you own, you'll keep them longer and you'll save a lot of money. If you keep falling in love with things you don't own, you'll spend a lot of money and replace things all the time. Well, how do you do that? There's a couple of things. One is to maybe anthropomorphize the things that you own. So that means if your brain is ready to fall in love with things that it thinks are human, if you treat these objects as a little bit more human, it'll make it easier for you to fall in love with them. So if you have, let's say, a toaster and you say, like, I'm going to fall in love with this toaster, try an exercise where every morning when you go down and make toast, when the toast pops up, thank the toaster for the toast. Say, like,
Okay.
oh, that was very good. Thank you for making this toast for me. And then name the toaster. Give it a name. So it's like, Loretta, thank you for the toast, right? So you've given it a name. That will definitely increase your love for it. Another thing to do is to put the love into the relationship and not expect perfection, just as you wouldn't with a person. I'm really glad that people can love other imperfect human beings, or nobody would love me. I'm glad, I'm glad that people are able to overlook my limitations and love me nonetheless. And it's the same with objects too. Nothing is really going to be perfect. If you are waiting for an object, you say, I'm only going to love my toaster when it's the perfect toaster. You're never
Mhm.
going to love your toaster because
No.
it's never going to be the perfect toaster.
No.
So if you can, so long, if this object is really a problem, well, then you should get rid of it and get a new one. If it's like a toaster that constantly burns your toast, you don't have to suffer through that. But if at a practical level, it's really pretty good, it just has a few minor things that, aren't perfect.
Mhm.
Think about it the way you would think about another human being. We all have things that aren't perfect about us, and we love people despite that.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, yeah. Thanks so much for sharing that. Now, I would love to switch into your book. Like, I know you have this book titled "The Things We Love," and there you provide like insights and secrets on brand love, which you mentioned briefly already at the beginning. So, is it possible for you to like tell us a little bit about your book and what brand love means?
Yeah. So the book is called The Things We Love: How Our Passions Connect Us and Make Us Who We Are. And it's about the psychology of loving things. And sometimes those could be brands or products, but they don't have to be. They could be things that you made yourself, or they could be activities like a hobby that you have that you really love doing. I love listening to music. I love dancing. So it could be all sorts of activities that you love as well. And it talks about sort of the three things that allow your brain to see these objects or activities as human enough to actually love them. So, one that I've mentioned already is you see it as part of your own identity. And since you're a person, that makes it human. Another that I mentioned briefly with the teapot example is you connect the object in your mind to somebody else. So maybe it's a gift that you received, or maybe it's a photograph of you with another person. And so in your mind, you're connecting that object to the other person. That makes you fall in love with it because you see it as human because through that kind of connection.
Yeah.
And the third thing is where the object isn't connected to another person, the object itself is seen as a person. And that kids do that when they love teddy bears. They're seeing their little stuffed bear as another person. And
Mm.
that's how come they're falling in love with it. But that's the same logic I was just talking about with the toaster, where, if you give it a name and you talk to it, a lot of people do that. A lot of people talk to their computers and talk to their cars and give these things names. And that does help you love them more and keep them more. So it talks about all three of those different mechanisms, as well as, some other things that might be happening in the future
Mm.
when as technology advances.
Yeah, yeah. And also you provide, some insights or some secrets behind, creating brands that people truly love. So I don't know if you could
Yeah,
reveal some of these secrets to us. Like, I would love to create a brand that people will truly love. So can you tell me what to do?
what to do. Right. So there's a couple of steps in terms of getting a brand that people love. And this is something I give a lot of what are called keynote addresses, a lot of talks to groups of people who are interested in this topic of their business people. How can we get people to love our products?
Yeah.
So the very first thing is it's got to be a really good product. If you think that you've got a mediocre product, but somehow you're going to find some secret trick that's going to make everybody fall in love with it, it's not going to happen. So the very first thing to do is to make sure it's an excellent product. But once that happens, there's a lot of excellent products out there that people don't love. So there's still a lot more than that. So the next step is the experience has to be at least a little bit pleasant. If something is very valuable to people, but it isn't pleasant, so like insurance, right? It's very valuable. It's important to people, life insurance, but it isn't fun in any way. I've talked to people for 30 years about things that they love. Nobody has ever said, I love my life insurance policy. It just never comes up. And that's because there has to be some sort of enjoyable aspect to it to get the love going. So it's got to be good. It's got to have some sort of enjoyability to it. And then the third part is you have to get the consumer's unconscious mind to start treating it like a person. So again, that can be any one of these three mechanisms. So it could be anthropomorphizing it, and a lot of companies do that. So car manufacturers, the front of the car looks a little bit like a human face. The headlights of the car
Yeah.
look like eyes, and the grill kind of looks like a mouth.
Mm.
And auto designers call that the face of the car. And they're very careful about how they make that so that it resembles a human face and gives the car a little bit of personality. Like, what kind of a face do we want this car to have? Other examples, there's a lot of products now that look a little bit like a person, or your cell phone. If you've got Siri or Alexa on your cell phone and you talk to it and it talks back to you, that's another kind of anthropomorphism. And people come to see their cell phone as a person in a certain way because of that. So a lot of companies are working with that type of anthropomorphism to help people fall in love with the products. There's also something you can do, even if your company doesn't make a product that has, that's able to look or sound or talk like a person in some way.
Yeah.
And that is, you can get people to associate the company or the brand with a person. So with Apple, people look at Steve Jobs a lot, and he became very closely associated with the company in a lot of people's minds. I know I did some interviews with people who love Ferraris, and they talk all the time about Enzo Ferrari, who is the founder of Ferrari Motor Company, and how much they admire him, and they really understand his life, and they're all really fascinated with him as a human being. And part of the reason they love these cars is that in their mind, they've connected the car to this person. So that even is true with companies that are what we call business to business companies. So if you're a company that's, say, selling, paper goods to restaurants, like you provide all the paper napkins and paper towels and that sort of stuff to restaurants, that's not a very emotional transaction. The people at the restaurants who buy your products, they don't think about the paper napkins very much in an emotional way, but they can form a relationship with the salesperson. And so if you can have a really strong relationship between the human salesperson that calls on the restaurant and delivers the products, then the people will come to perhaps love your company a little bit, not because they think of the products as that important, but because it's connected through the person, the salesperson who they know. So a lot of it is making those sorts of personal connections. And the last mechanism that's also very common is to get the consumer to see the product or the brand as part of their own identity. And lots of companies do this. Luxury good companies are very big on this, but so are companies like Patagonia, which is having a bit of a moment now. And part of the reason Patagonia is loved by so many consumers is that it takes a very strong environmental stand. And a lot of consumers value that a lot. And so they feel like Patagonia reflects their values, reflects what's important to them. And so they want to make that part of their own sense of identity. And once they do that, then Patagonia becomes part of their identity, and then they've fallen in love with it. And you get that kind of effect.
Oh, wow, that's cool. That means you make the consumers or your customers feel like they're part of your family, basically. And that way, they won't look somewhere else when you want to get that product of yours. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's trying to form some personal relationships with the customers and really always putting the customer first. People respond with love to love. So one of the best predictors in the literature, the psychology of dating, where they talk about human beings and why we fall in love with other human beings. One of the biggest things that makes people fall in love with somebody is simply knowing that person loves them. That's extremely motivating to people.
Yeah.
If you feel confident. And similarly, if as a consumer, you really feel like this company loves you, like it's not just trying to look at you as a way to make another penny, but it actually cares about you in some way. That really makes a difference. I'll just give an example. I go to this dentist and I'm kind of on the edge with the dentist because in the United States, the insurance will pay for part, but you also can pay for part of your own dental care. And this dentist is really, really expensive. And so I was, not sure about how long I wanted to use this dentist, but she did some work on my teeth. And then later that day in the evening, she called me on my cell phone and just asked, how is it? When I was working on it, I saw that there were certain small issues. I just want to make sure everything is okay. And I told her everything was fine. And she said, well, it's Friday night. If you have a problem, I don't want you to wait till Monday. You've got my cell phone number. If there's a problem, I want you to call me. And I was like, okay, so maybe you're really an expensive dentist, but I can't leave you now. You clearly actually you care about me. I mean, you gave me your cell phone number and you told me to call you on a weekend if I was having a problem.
Yeah.
You know, that's like, that really shows that you actually care about what's happening to me.
Mm.
And that's very motivating to a consumer.
Yeah, that way you just fall in love with that service or with that product, and then you're like,
Yeah,
I can't do without it. I can't do without this product.
yeah, yeah.
Oh, that's good. A lovely way to build up a love story, basically, with the or to
Mm,
build up that emotional connection with
yeah.
people. Yeah. But if you look at the consumer side now, how do our lives as consumers influence our happiness? Like, how does, the things that we buy, what we spend our money on, the services that we, make use of, how does that influence our happiness? Like,
Yeah. So in general, materialism is a bad thing in terms of happiness. So by materialism, I mean a materialistic person is someone who cares a lot about products and brands. It's a really important part of their life. And they judge their own success and other people's success based on what they own. And we all know people like that who are busy, like they want to show off what they own. And you feel like if you're not wearing the right thing, they're going to judge you because you don't have the right, whatever it is, the right car or the right clothing or what have you.
yeah,
Or God forbid, the wrong cell phone. People are strangely judgmental about that.
iPhone,
So
Android.
that's yeah, that's another aspect of materialism, being sort of judgy of other people that way, and then also believing that, boy, if I had more money or if I had more things, my life would be so much better. Having this belief that it's going to make a big difference in your life. That you put that together, that's what I mean by materialism. And in people who have those characteristics as personality characteristics tend not to be very happy people. They also tend not to be very healthy. They're prone to drug and alcohol abuse and smoking. So they have like a lot, unfortunately, of bad habits in their life. They also are prone to get into debt, which is not so surprising if, it's very important for them to show off what they have. So some of it is that having those attitudes causes problems. And some of it is that the reason people have those attitudes is they had something bad in their childhood. So they came out of their childhood without feeling really secure and without feeling psychologically that healthy. And then the materialism is a way of coping with that. And these underlying psychological problems are often what's really causing their unhappiness there. So you don't want to end up in that position. But some people, when they get caught up with this word matter, like materialism, and they think it's just about physical objects. There's nothing wrong with physical objects. There's nothing wrong with the physical world. There's nothing wrong with surrounding yourself with paintings that you love. There's nothing wrong with having a hobby where you make stuff and you make stuff for yourself and you enjoy it and you give it to your friends. And that's all for the good. So just because something is an object, it doesn't mean you shouldn't care about it or shouldn't be involved with it. And as I mentioned briefly at the beginning of this, one of the secrets is to love the things you own instead of loving the things you don't own.
Yeah.
And materialists are very, very big on loving the things they don't own. In fact, there's two different sort of paths. You can imagine two different stories. And so one is the psychologically healthy person who, buys some object, and maybe it's a tool they use in their wood shop, and they use it for their hobby of making little, I don't know, wooden furniture or something like this. And
Yeah.
they discover that it works really well and it's really fun to use.
Mm.
And they just really fall in love with it. And the more they use it, the more attached to it they feel, because it works so well for them. And then they use it and they make these beautiful pieces of furniture and they have them in their house and they feel very proud of them. And maybe they give one to their mother. And, so it's all connected to these relationships they have with the other people. And it's a really good thing. That kind of attachment to an object or love for an object is really emotionally quite healthy. But that's very different from a materialist, because this person, the healthy person, is loving the object more the longer they have it. They get to know more about it and they use it more and they love it more. Whereas materialists, there's this really fascinating work by a researcher named Marsha Richins, who shows that materialists, they like things the most before they own them.
Oh.
So the most pleasure they get out of something isn't actually using it. It's that period before they buy it, when they're having all of these mental fantasies about these daydreams. They spend all this time daydreaming about what it's going to be like when I have this thing.
Yeah.
And what they really enjoy are the daydreams. They don't enjoy the object. And then they buy it. And from the minute they buy it, they start liking it less and less and less over time. And so because they don't actually, once they own it, they don't actually love the things they own. That's why they have to keep buying new stuff, because they keep having this idea that somehow the new stuff is going to be different from the old stuff.
Yeah.
So what you really want to avoid is that kind of a pattern where you enjoy the fantasy of having something, the daydream about having something. You get excited when you buy it, but then when you get it home, you don't really make good use of it. So if you see that, notice that in yourself. Notice that you're going shopping with a friend and you buy stuff and then you get home and you don't really wear it or you don't use it and it doesn't really pay off for you. What's often happening there is that you don't really care about the shopping. You care about the time you spend with your friend going shopping. So maybe you could both save a whole bunch of money and start going for a walk in the park instead. You'll be healthier, and you won't have to buy all this stuff and you won't clutter up your house. And you can take the consumerism out of it.
Yeah, that's very brilliant. Wow, Aaron, I've learned so much from you already from this conversation. Like, being manufacturer of a product or service, like how I can make people fall in love with my product, and from the consumer side also how to ensure that I'm very careful with how I spend my money and how I derive happiness from what I spend my money on. But before I let you go, Aaron, I would just love to know this: like, how can I build a very healthy relationship between my income or my wealth, the objects that I want to acquire in life, and my happiness?
So that's a great question. There's a wonderful saying from Charles Dickens, and I'm not going to get it exactly word for word right. But basically, he says, of course, he uses the British terms for money, but the gist of it is the difference between money and happiness is $1. If you earn $100 and you spend 99, that's happiness. If you earn $100 and you spend that's misery. Or I guess that would be $2. The difference would be $2.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of wisdom there, that learning to live within your means, which I know is a very tough thing to do a lot of the time. But staying out of debt is very healthy in terms of your happiness. It's not just good for you financially, which obviously it is, but getting into credit card debt is very stressful. And so a lot of this comes down to making friends who you really enjoy the time you spend with them, but they also share your financial goals. So if you're around people who just love to spend a lot of money, and to be friends with them means you go out to expensive restaurants all the time, and that's just not something that's in your budget, it's really hard to stay within your budget when your social life is based around other people who are doing things differently. And it's useful to sort of find ways. I mean, you don't have to lose them all as friends, but find other things to do that aren't costing so much money,
Mm-hmm.
and see if you can work it that way, because your social life, your relationships with people are what really drive happiness.
Mm.
It's very clear that there's a couple things you can do if you want to be happier, according to the scientific research. There's a few things you can do that will make a big difference. So one of them is get enough sleep at night, which is very enjoyable to do and makes you happy all the next day.
Yeah.
But the other one is work on and maintain and value your relationships with people. There's some people who used to think, a lot of researchers used to think, that if you looked at people and saw people who had like very close relationships with objects, who cared a lot about like the things they owned, that those people would not have good relationships with people. That if you had good relationships with people, you wouldn't need relationships with objects and vice versa. But when people actually did the research, they found it was the opposite. They found that the people who had the best relationships with other people also tended to have feelings of closeness with objects as well. And it turns out that some people are just better at forming relationships than other people. And people who are good at making relationships with people are good at making relationships with objects. And
Mm-hmm.
people who have sort of standoffish relationships with people tend not to get attached to objects either,
Yeah.
because they're not uncomfortable with that kind of attachment.
Mm-hmm.
So what is going to drive your happiness, though, very much, like I've given some advice about how to be happy about the things you own, and that's what I study.
Yeah.
But none of it makes anywhere near as much impact as the relationships you have with the other people in your life. So if you're feeling lonely, you got to get out there and make friends and do more social stuff and get yourself involved with other people. And if you have friends and you're not seeing them, you got to find time to see them more often. And if you're seeing people and you don't find the relationships rewarding, you've got to either find another way of relating to the people or maybe make some new friends that touch you in a deeper way. But you've got to get your relationship with your romantic partner, if you have one, with your
Mm-hmm.
family and your friends right, because that's where your happiness is really going to come from.
Yes, that's where your happiness will truly come from. Thank you, Aaron, for this wonderful, soulful conversation. I truly appreciate your presence here today, and I thank you so much for helping us to really go deep down into understanding the psychology of love. That was wonderful. If there are people out there who would still love to reach out to you, maybe connect with you, maybe get the book, what's the best way to reach out to you and work with you, Aaron?
Right. So, first of all, a friend of mine came up with this nice mnemonic about my name. He said it would be Ahuvia to remember Ahuvia. So if you just, there aren't that many Ahuvia, Ahuvia, there aren't that many Ahuvias out there. There's a few other ones. But if you Google Ahuvia and the things we love, or just the things we love, you'll find me. I've got a website called The Things We Love. You can connect with me there. That's a great way to reach out. And then the book is available at most English bookstores or online through any of the big online retailers.
Yeah, awesome. I'll place the link to your website in the show notes of this episode. I encourage anyone who is interested to just click on the link, copy the link, reach out to Aaron, and get the book from any bookstore, Amazon, online, anywhere. Thank you so much, Aaron, for this wonderful conversation. I truly appreciate it. Thank you.
Oh, I enjoyed this very much. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much.